So this is 160. It is Wednesday. Good. Life is good. So we're down to the last bit of Chapter 3, Operational Risk Management. And so I'm just going to start with the slides here. And the first thing is there is a report that just came out from the NSA and the CISA, which is very relevant to this class. This is exactly like the compliance frameworks we've talked about. Let me just get it here. I'll just open it. This is a PDF from the government. It just came out a few days ago, and it shows the top 10 cybersecurity misconfigurations. These lists are quite important, and they lead to compliance and such, compliance standards, and it explains what these are. And so if you want to, I added it to this course. I put an extra credit quiz. If you read this thing and answer some questions about it in a quiz, it's worth extra credit because it's very much like the other standards we talk about, just a newer one. So here they are: default configuration, improper separation of user and administrator privilege, insufficient network monitoring, lack of network segmentation, poor patching, bypass of access controls, weak multi-factor authentication, insufficient access control lists, poor credential hygiene, or unrestricted code execution, and they explain them in quite a bit more detail. And it's a very good thing for any of my security classes, and especially the management classes. You should understand all these terms and understand what they mean and what their significance is, because this is what happens when you buy any product. You'll compare it to a list of things it should stop. And so anyway, there's an extra credit quiz. You'll find it in Canvas. You can take if you like. Testing your comprehension of these things that you get by reading that 40-page PDF from the government. Anyway, so here we're down to the last bit here, operational risk management. So this is risks that have to do with the survival of an organization. Operational risk is risk coming from some sort of security incident which will impact your business systems so you can't continue with your business. So therefore, you have to make plans of how you will deal with bad things that might happen that would affect your ability to perform the business. And so one thing you do is you determine your recovery objectives. And these are time intervals that you figure how long you can live without certain business systems, and therefore what order and what priority to give when recovering them. So one important issue these days especially is third-party risk. You have to consider your cloud services and your providers and people you're trusting outside your company. What happens if they go down? How are you going to deal with that? So you have Risk Register is your main record. We talked about it before. This is your log of your historic risks, and it has a lot of metadata about your risks, what problems it caused, how you dealt with it, and so on. And that will help you organize your planning. So risk management objectives, there are a bunch of them: recovery time, recovery point, recovery capacity, service delivery, maximum tolerable downtime and outage, and service level agreements. All these have to do with how reliable different parts of your business have to be and how much unreliability you can tolerate in those things. So the recovery time objective is the time when something goes down until you get it back up. The obvious thing, what any customer would say, website's down, well, tell me when it's up, that sort of thing. And so you figure it out. Your point of sale terminals, for example, if you can't, I went to Phil's a week ago, and there was a network outage at Square, so they couldn't use their terminals. You had to pay for your coffee with cash. So that's a failure of point of sale terminals. And so, during peak business hours, you probably really need to fix that quickly. If it's at night and your business is shut anyway, you have no customers, then it wouldn't be that recovery time objective could be longer. So you consider how important the data is, how important the asset is. And so processes with short recovery time objectives are things that are critical to your operation, things that you really need or your business is losing a lot of money. For example, City College doesn't have much of any backup on the website. If the City College website goes down, it doesn't really matter. We don't really need it to teach the classes. It's just there so students can look at like next semester's offerings and stuff. It could probably be down for a week and it probably wouldn't really impair our business much. But if you're Google, that website can't even go down for an hour or you seriously harm your business, because that is your whole business, is delivering that web stuff. So you get this, you establish this, you interview people, interview your personnel and management and see what the executives think, and then you consider a business impact analysis. which is part of business continuity planning, where you figure out how essential each part of the business is and how long you can persist without it. Now, recovery point objective is another issue. Recovery time objective is how long it will take to bring back the impaired part of your business. The recovery point objective is how thoroughly you will recover it. For example, if you back up every night and then your servers all crash, when you recover from your backup tapes, you might lose 24 hours of work and have to do it over. So that's the recovery point. What's the acceptable amount of data loss? If it's not acceptable to have to redo a day worth of work, you'll have to arrange something like a continuous backup solution where it's constantly mirroring the data so you don't lose as much data. But of course, that will cost more. So just like everything else, you have to decide what you need and decide whether it's worth paying for it. Recovery capacity objective is when you consider your temporary process. Like I said, I went to Phil's and they couldn't use credit cards, so they used cash. Now, when you use cash, that is going to have less efficiency than the previous system. Some customers won't have cash these days, and it'll take more time to ring up the cash and make change, so you won't get 100% of the efficiency of what you had before. So you can figure out that's your capacity. How much does your substitute process how does it compare to the real process? Maybe you could only get 80% as much work done per unit time with your substitute process. All right, then there's service delivery. This is when you provide service to another part of your company or some other company. How good is the service? And compared to normal operation after an event. So you'll measure transaction throughput, response time, and so on. These things are all related. So how much is your service degraded by the consequences of an incident, like ransomware or a power outage or anything like that? So then you consider the maximum tolerable downtime. This is the amount of time you can stand for a process to be down before it would endanger the business's survival. And they may start with this and then derive the other things for it. Another word for it is the acceptable interruption window. So it's different for each business function. For example, the website might be 7 days you can tolerate it being down, but your payroll could be down for 28 days. Your employees only get paid once or twice a month anyway, so that could be like up to a month late, and it wouldn't really be a big impairment. So that's your maximum tolerable outage, how long you can tolerate operating in your recovery mode. A city college, at least a few years ago when I saw a diagram of the network, we had 2 layers of firewalls, and if one fails, we still have a firewall, but it's not as good, so we continue to operate, but with a lower level of security. So service level agreements are agreements that you make with the person you're providing a service to, guaranteeing a certain quality or quantity of work and remedies for shortfalls. This, by the way, is why people pay Cisco. Cisco equipment costs about twice as much as their competitors, but it all comes with a gold level service. If you buy a Cisco router and it goes down, you can call them and they will fix it. They will absolutely fix it. They will help you. They will send up code. They will fly somebody to your location with a replacement router within 24 hours. They will absolutely fix that thing for you, no matter what. And that's why you pay a lot more for it. That's a high level of service. All right. So, business continuity planning. This is quite similar to risk management. Both of them, you try to discover risks and remedies, you perform risk assessments and business impact analysis, and then you try to identify threats that can lead to disasters. The risk management is for overall risk for the company or any specified risk. Business continuity planning particularly focuses on risks which could cause the business to fail and go out of business. So big problems that could end your whole business are what you're planning for in business continuity planning. How are we going to survive a disaster like the pandemic we just went through, which messes up everything? So then third-party risk management is extremely important these days. Maybe 10 years ago, most companies ran all their own equipment and all their own servers and everything. Now almost nobody does. Everybody puts their stuff on Amazon or the Google Cloud, and they outsource their payroll and their taxes and just everything, their human resources and their customer relationship is at Salesforce, and just all your stuff is actually running on somebody else's systems. So considering the third-party risk is super important. What about if that third party gets hacked or goes down? What's that going to do to your business? So you consider what the risk is out there. When you're outsourcing to the cloud, there's software as a service and platform as a service. Software as a service is like Gmail, where there's some program running and you don't even see the code or update it or anything. They run it and you just use it. Canvas is software as a service. Platform as a service is where you have like a web host. They're running web hosting, but you're putting up files. And so part of that is your responsibility. So it becomes complicated when you're using third-party services. How much of that do you really control, and how much of that is really your responsibility? And more than half of all breaches now come through third parties. So you end up with a chart like this. If you run things on premises on your own server, then you're responsible for everything. The power, the backups, the application, the data, everything is yours. But if you put it in the cloud, it depends. If it's software as a service like Gmail, they are responsible for everything. If they lose the data through getting hacked, it's not my responsibility. They have to keep the servers up. They have to do the power and everything. It's all just them. But these are the in-between ones. Platform as a service is like a web host where they're running a program installed on some server and I'm providing just the data. So I'm responsible for maybe the data and maybe applications if I'm writing PHP files, but I'm not responsible for the operating system or the storage or the networking or anything. That's the provider. Infrastructure as a service is like a virtual server. Like you get a DigitalOcean. I get a server, I choose the operating system, now I'm responsible for the software and the patches and everything, but not the hardware and the power and such. So there's a lot of things here like human resources, application security, system monitoring, data encryption, network intrusion detection. This is a big issue. You may not be able to access the logs on the server. You may not be able to see the network logs because that would apply to other customers, and you're not allowed to see what's going on with other customers. So it becomes a big issue here. And this is why if you use cloud services like Amazon, you have to pay more and get their defenses like guard duty. They give you defenses you can get, and so does Azure, and so does Google, and those defenses give you some more visibility into the attacks on your infrastructure. And you have to work that out with your cloud provider. So there's a third-party risk management life cycle. Initial assessment, where you decide whether it's even worth hiring these people at all, like do they meet our compliance standards or something. Then you make a legal agreement, and you classify third parties as acceptable. You have questionnaires and evidence to verify compliance, and you have other assessments of third parties, and then risk mitigation, where you consider they're doing something that is too risky for you. So the initial assessment, you decide if they are suitable. Do they really offer the service we need? Amazon offers more expensive levels of service where they guarantee to comply with HIPAA. So you can put health records on there. They also have a special government level, so does Azure. Azure, by default, they won't even tell you what country your data is in. They just put it on any server they want to. But if you pay more for the government version, they guarantee your data will always be in the United States and other things like that.
So you can specify in what region
you can, but they don't guarantee that it will stay in that region. At least they didn't I looked at it a couple of years ago. There's different services they offer. I think this was their serverless offering.
They let you specify in what region so they can, what services, like they only replace the VMware within their servers.
Yeah, but they have backups and stuff, and they don't tell you where those are.
Yeah.
So I mean anyway. So all right. So anyway, this means you have a request for information or request for proposal, and the cloud company has to give you a document listing exactly what they provide, and you can decide whether that meets your requirements. Then you get a legal agreement where they explain what they're going to provide and the pricing and everything, and you sign this. Now they have a legal obligation to live up to that level of service. And so you've got security and privacy here and controls, and very often you tie it to one of the standards like ISO or SOC 2 or PCI or so on. You say that we meet a certain standard. That's usually the easiest way to convey this. And you may well have formal statements of how they're going to do incident response. And so then they might notify you when they have a security incident. Maybe they need to tell you when they have a security incident, and you'll have to be careful about this. Most companies do try to lie and conceal their security incidents, like Uber. Uber got ransomwared, and so they paid the ransom, and then they said, we're going to call that a bug bounty, not a security incident. And the CEO was actually prosecuted for that. I don't know if he actually went to jail, but they wanted to put him in jail for that. That's the thing. You can try to conceal your security incidents and lie and make them sound less dangerous. And companies are always tempted to do that. And so then you might have the right to audit what they're doing and periodic review, and you might have due diligence where they have to fill out questionnaires and even send you evidence showing that they are in fact monitoring logs and other things like that. And you might purchase cyber insurance to give you some money to help pay for the costs of breaches. So then you can classify your third parties, you decide how risky they are, and then you can choose that we'll put part of our business on this expensive Amazon service, but the other part that is not as secure, we'll put it on a cheaper cloud provider with a lower level of security, because that data is not as sensitive. Almost everybody, by the way, is doing that. Almost everybody is now using multi-clouds, where you use multiple cloud providers for different parts of your business. And so you might have questionnaires where they have to just fill it out, or you might request evidence, specific artifacts to back up the questionnaire responses. Here's PCI DSS. They explain what PCI DSS assessments are. If you're a small merchant and you take credit cards, they just send you a questionnaire. You just have to fill out. You have to promise them, I am encrypting the servers, I am encrypting network traffic, I have a web application firewall, and so on. All you do is fill out the questionnaire, and that's all they do. But if you take more, like 1 million credit card transactions a year, then you have to actually pay for an auditor to come in from the outside and actually inspect your stuff to make sure you're really doing all that. So here's typical artifacts. They want to see your policy. They want to see records of your awareness training, details on your employee background checks and other legal agreements with the employees, your vulnerability management process, your secure development process, your insurance, your incident response plan. The sort of thing you might have to prove that you are maintaining a reasonably secure company. And so then you can have an assessment to assess the security of your third party and periodically thereafter. So you might consider the financial risk, the geopolitical risk. If you might find it cheaper to purchase hosting in another country, but that might be geopolitical, like, Russia offers a bunch of servers that people put bulletproof hosting, but now we're practically at war with Russia, so you can't have it there. And now there's all these embargoes, and you can't really outsource things to China anymore, which everybody was doing, so, that's an issue. The politics of the world can affect the utility of these services you're buying. All right. And you can subscribe to information services. There are business advisory services that give you information about risks that are out there and the geopolitical landscape and the different categories of business and so on. There's general news, and then there's special services you subscribe to just to give you information relevant to your business. What are the current changes in the world that you need to be aware of? New kinds of attacks, new threat actors with new motivations, and so on. So very often your third parties have unacceptable practices, like they don't have security awareness training or encryption, and now you have to decide what to do. You can try to get them to change their process, but they may refuse. Then you'll have to decide to either accept that risk or put in some kind of control of your own, like encrypted at your end, or buy insurance or something, but this is an issue. All right, so let's try a Kahoot about this stuff, which is 3. All right, 3D1. All right. All right. I'll wait till the end of the song anyway. Good, okay. All right, so a contract with a vendor. That's a service level agreement, all right? They promise a certain level of service, and there are punishments if they fail to provide it. All right, which one is a percentage of normal business efficiency? That's this one, recovery capacity objective. This is how much of the capacity you're going to recover using whatever temporary thing you use while the main server is down. All right, a common type of audit. I hear about this all the time. This is what many of my consulting gigs, they want to make sure that our stuff is up to SOC 2 standards. SOC 2 is a very standard level of security, and they say there are classes training people up to a SOC 2 level of security, and they are. All right. All right, and what's the weakest form of due diligence? Yeah, the questionnaire. You ask them what they're doing, and they tell you. You don't verify it with any of these other things, which are things that back up that claim. So they could just be lying on the questionnaire. So it's the weakest form of due diligence. All right, here. All right, good. So, let's go back to here. Okay, so the risk register we talked about. This is the document that records the risks you have considered and what you've done about them. It's got the origin of the risk, the possible impact, the assets, the probability, and the treatment. So it's a central business record, and it's a focal point of evidence. This is something that will show that you are taking risks seriously and you are doing things about it. And it's got a lot of information in here. Here's a typical way it'd be laid out. You've got some unique number, status, dates, the source of the event, incident number, threat description. Then you got the threat actor, who was attacking you, if you can figure it out, the vulnerability, third-party information, the business impact, the technical impact, a list of who's responsible at the company, the asset owner and the risk owner, the untreated probability of occurrence, and then untreated impact and risk score, then after treatment, probability, impact, and risk score, so you can decide how much you got, how much benefit your treatment provided, how much your treatment cost, and how much effort was required to implement your treatment. All these are important things to record what you've done and help you decide what to do in the future, what kind of risk treatment you applied, and who approved it inside the company, and who's the owner of the risk treatment, making sure that it's still happening and all that, and what's the actual cost of the risk treatment. These are all the sort of things that ought to be in your risk register so you can be guided in dealing with future incidents and future risks by having the information about what you did before and how well it worked. So you got a lot of sources of information. Your risk assessments and vulnerability assessments are providing data that goes in there. Your audits are, your security incident logs are, and you may be getting threat intelligence from outside your company, like those services I talked about that will give you information about your industry. And you may have consultants and information about new laws and regulations. These will, of course, change things. You may have laws that require you to do things and change your risk. So the strategic risks are what belongs in the risk register. Strategy is long-term thinking. So a tactic is a short-term training. So you do a tactic to win one battle, but a strategy to win the war. And the thing that belongs in the risk register is strategic risks, things which could destroy the company completely. That's the main thing you want to have there, that affect the entire organization. Like you don't have any way to verify that servers are getting patched on time. and that's a risk to the whole company. Third-party risks also belong there. Tactical risks typically do not belong in the risk register because they're too short-term and really not that important. They're like routine activities you have to do. So you have a detailed risk analysis for each entry in the risk register. So if your software development team, this is exactly what's happening on one of my consulting jobs. Their software development team writes lousy code, so they're in fact implementing all these remedies. Secure development training is what I'm providing. They have a program, they're keeping track of how many defects the programmers make, and then they have code scanning tool available to them, and then they have in the build system another step where you have to scan it for vulnerabilities, and they won't let it be deployed unless it scans clean enough. So this is a proper secure development process. You have to have steps and tests for compliance before you ship the code. One thing I often say there, which I might as well mention here, if you find something during the planning of an application, a security problem, it will cost you something like a unit of 1 in time and money. But if you find it later, after you've developed the application at your quality control and you have to do rework, that costs you 10 times as much. And if you don't find it until it's actually deployed to customers, and now you have to have a patch and a security bulletin, that costs you 100 times as much. So it is very, very, very much better to detect security problems early before they become disasters you have to fix with product recalls and patches and all that stuff. So, all right, anyway, so here's remedies. You might have penetration tests, web application firewalls to limit attacks coming in, so you can have vulnerable code, but the attacks are stopped so they don't hit your vulnerable code. Those are things that will lower the risk. Even after your risk treatment, some risk will remain. Nothing is ever perfect, and you might have to go through 2 or more cycles of treatment. You might implement a control and then examine it and decide the risk is still too high, so you have to improve the control or add another control. It might take a while to get the risk down to an acceptable level. All right, so then you have to integrate risk management into your other processes, so your software development, your change management and configuration management, and incident and problems management. These are all other processes that will include risk management, your physical security, the enterprise risk, human resource, and project management. These are parts of your business, and each one of them has security considerations that you will have to consider as you move through levels of maturity. I mean, nobody jumps from 0 into considering everything. You start, with your business just being ad hoc with people doing their job, and then you develop management, and then you develop governance, watching to make sure certain things are done. Then you might meet a compliance standard, and then you gradually integrate security into more and more of your processes as you become more secure, more mature as a business. So for secure software development, like I said, you have threat modeling during design phase. I teach this as part of my private consulting classes, how to do threat modeling so you can consider the risks in the product you're developing. And then, of course, there are coding standards, and my company I'm consulting with has hundreds of internal policy standards. And part of the lesson is learning how to search through their internal database of standards to decide which standards apply to your product, and you have to meet their internal standards, which are pretty much like these compliance things we've seen, but they have their own customized one. Then you have code reviews and code scanning, application scanning, and application penetration testing. Code reviews are static tests that look at the code without running it. Application scanning looks at the running application by sending in data the way a customer would, and you want to do both of those things because they'll pick up different vulnerabilities. And then change management. This applies to any change at the company, like opening a new office, moving to a new version of a server, changing your personnel policies like the U.S. government just did. They just passed a bill that the federal government can now hire cybersecurity people without requiring them to have a college degree. That was a big step forward, and that's a change. And that's the kind of thing. You have your reason for your change, when the change will be performed, and if you think about something like a hardware or software upgrade, then you have to replace your servers with different servers, and you have to decide when you're going to do it, how you're going to test it to verify that it worked, and always a backup procedure. So you typically wait until the weekend when your business is shut. You put on the new servers and you say, okay, if we haven't got the new stuff working by like midnight on Saturday, we're going to quit and go back to the old system so that when the people come in on Monday, at least something will be working. That's your backup procedure, because there's a high chance whenever you make a big change that something will be dreadfully wrong. And it will turn out that the new system is just not going to work at all. It's something big is wrong that will take you time to fix. So you don't just, you always make a plan to at least go back to the way it was before, if necessary. And then you consider the security impact and the privacy impact and how it might affect other things in your company. And so that's why you have a change management team at a more mature company. You don't just change things, you make a request to change, and it's reviewed by your change control board that considers all these issues and decides whether it's really worth doing or not. So your change review board will include security personnel and other people saying, what effect will this have on our business? This college, about 10 years ago, had a very good change process. They replaced all the computers in all the offices with Windows XP machines. Before, they were all different things, and they actually did the right thing. They notified everybody like 6 months in advance. Then they did it to just one location and helped those people and learned how to do it. They gradually rolled it through the college over months. That's how you do it. You make a plan. You're careful. You realize that you're disrupting everything. People don't know how to use the new system. There are bugs, so this is what a proper change process is. You have a carefully managed process so everybody can learn how to use the new system and you can learn what its benefits and problems are and deal with them. All right, so configuration management is, the settings of your things, your passwords, your other settings like firewall settings and all these other things. You have a configuration management database, which is a repository of all this information. And then you have security considerations, like you want to protect that data from unauthorized access. There was a news article last week showing that thousands of GitHub repositories still have private API keys on them, which surprised me because 6 months ago, GitHub announced that they had automatic scanning to stop you from putting API keys, but I checked and it's not turned on by default. You have to turn it on. So a bunch of companies have not turned it on, and they're putting API keys in their code and comment, and that is really bad. That's on that list of the 10 misconfigurations. That was poor hygiene of credentials. You put your credentials somewhere stupid where people can find it. But that's the kind of thing. Your configuration files do have secrets in them, and you have to be careful with them. So incident and problem management, these are incidents, not just hacking, but other things like outages and errors. So you've got personnel analyzing a problem, need to understand its security impacts. If you're changing the firewall, that'll change things. If you do things to restore service, that might have security impacts, like rebooting a server might destroy log information and other things you might need. Your root cause analysis may have security impacts. You may be changing permissions on files and such, and your corrective action is very likely to have security impacts. This is something that's having almost every business. Almost every business knows they need to move to two-factor authentication, but it typically takes like 2 years to do it, and it's much, much more difficult than you think because there are so many devices and services authenticating, and they often don't really do it all the way through, like the service accounts that are automatic processes that do things like fetch email from a server or something. Those are typically not running two-factor, and they need to be. And it's very hard to get all this stuff up. It's a big deal to make a corrective action to lower your security vulnerability. It very well can have consequences all over the place. It's happening to all of us now. Google is changing to passkey authentication for Google services. So that's going to change how you log in, and that's going to have a lot of consequences for a lot of people. That's why many people I've heard one recommendation I've heard is you just turn it off and don't use it, which is probably the right move for the time being. Because, for example, you people in this room, you're using a computer you don't use all the time, and Google Passkey lives on one piece of hardware. It's not authenticating the user, it's authenticating the hardware. If you were to put a Google Passkey on these machines in this room, other students could log in as you, and you wouldn't be able to log in at home. So it's wildly inappropriate for that kind of situation. It's more for somebody with a smartphone. Then you authenticate on your smartphone, and you only have one person using it, and you always have it with you, that sort of thing. Anyway, So physical security is also important for everything. Having your servers and your equipment locked up so people can't physically get at it is, of course, very important. So you can include the physical security in the risk register and your risk treatments. If people just destroy your servers or steal them, then they've gone down, and they've also stolen the data off them probably, if you didn't have it encrypted. So you include information and physical security in all your plans. And if you have, also consider your environmental systems that control heating and humidity and such. Those things also have to be protected. Then you got information risk and enterprise risk management. That enterprise risk management has its own risk register for business-specific risks, and it may be combined with your information risk, which is what we've been talking about, and might be separate. So that, then you have human resource with things like background checks, training, development, and management of this system. This is something many companies don't do. This is why, I heard a statistic a few years ago that 75% of people lie on their resume. They claim to have degrees they don't have, certificates they don't have, because most people don't verify it. And that's a serious flaw. You should be verifying the resume. You should be calling their previous employers to see if they got fired for doing something bad. That's simple background checks. Most companies don't bother. And then they end up hiring people that will do terrible things, that just go from company to company, stealing and doing terrible things. So it's an issue. And your project management, like I described for the server rollout and the desktop rollout here, if you, at the onset of a project, you consider a risk analysis, what the consequences will be, and then you decide how you're going to roll it out and how you're going to verify that you have maintained security while rolling it out. It reminds me of a attack called Bugbear. Windows 2000, Microsoft's Windows 2000 had the following property. When you freshly installed the system, it would first bring up the network card, get an IP address, and then the firewall would not come on for 3 seconds later. So people would get infected with Bugbear, they would reinstall Windows, and it would get reinfected before the firewall could come on. And it would hide in the printer. So you'd like re-image all the machines, and they'd all still be infected. It drove people nuts. So that's the kind of thing you have to consider. Another issue, a lot of people make backup images with like Norton Ghost of their servers and their desktops. Then when they get ransomware or something, they restore from that. But the problem is that image is 6 months behind on its patches. So when you restore those machines, they're vulnerable. So what you really need to do is you need to patch the image up to fully patched before you deploy it. And it's the kind of thing you consider. Your attempt to deal with an issue may create vulnerabilities. So then there's risk monitoring and reporting. You have internal audits and vulnerability assessments and risk assessments. And the primary audience for this is your own management. They show them some kind of dashboard so they can see, here's our level of compliance or scanning and so on, so they can tell if things are good and if they're improving. So you have key risk indicators. These are things you measure to see how bad the risk is at your company. And usually you look at the trend. Are we getting better or worse? So you look at number of vulnerabilities found. This usually doesn't mean much. It really doesn't mean much at all because vulnerabilities are not all the same. So what's a lot more valuable is time to remediate vulnerabilities. That's much better. How long does it take us to deploy a patch from the time it's released to the time we test it and we deploy it? Other things, how many security incidents were serious and we had to notify somebody about it? How much attrition rate do we have? How much are our workers just quitting and leaving? That gives you a clue that if your company is successful and people are enjoying their work and doing good work, or if it's a horrible place and everybody's just running for the door. How much money you have to pay in bug bounties? How many people have done their security training? How many risks are identified in risk assessments? All these things measure the success of your security program. And then there's training and awareness. My area, of course. People often don't understand the risks with general computing. They don't know that you shouldn't pick up thumb drives you find in the street and just plug them in, things like that. They don't know the details of the security consequences of their applications. They don't understand business processes and procedures. Here's a good one. If your machine pops up some error message, do you know what to do? If you have some security problem, you get some evidence that somebody is stealing money, do you know who to talk to? Do you know who to report to? You should know. And your training should include that. If there's a security problem, here's what you do. And you will know whether it's your responsibility to report problems. And then documenting all these things. You have policy and objectives, you have roles and responsibilities for the people, you have methods and techniques, you have locations for data storage and archival. These are all things that should be documented so you know what's going on. And I see Lenny and Carl, they can't say anything bad that's illegal, but they can say what dates you worked there and nothing more. Yes, that's right. That's an issue when you call people. That's right. They usually won't get a clear answer out of them if you tell them, why did you fire this guy? Was he a crook? You're right. People usually don't want to answer that because they're afraid of getting sued. Anyway, and then you document your risk tolerance, why you accepted certain risks, your business rules for what you put in the risk register, what treatments you apply, and how your metrics are determined. And as I mentioned before, communication and escalation protocols. Who do you have to tell? Under what circumstances do you have to escalate to higher levels? And you have to have a review cycle, making sure that your program is aligned with the business, because everything has to be a closed loop. You have to constantly be inspecting your program and determining how good it is and modifying it to deal with the constantly changing environment. So let's try another Kahoot. That's here. I'll wait till the end of the song. All right. All right, so risks that affect the entire organization, what are they? They are strategic risks, long-range issues. All right, which one of these will lower risk? The risk treatment, that is something that lowers risk, just like medical treatment lowers a medical risk. All right, which one of these uses a CMDB? Configuration management. Change management is more a human activity. Configuration management is pretty much all computer files, things like group policies for servers and such. And so they're stored in a computer database, a configuration management database. And which business unit has its own risk register? Is the one that has its own register. These are business risks that might destroy the whole company. All right. All right. 20. the video.